right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar training titled What's New in MAGS 12.0. My name is Catherine Pembroke. I'm the Administrative and Training Coordinator for the Maryland State Commission on Criminal Sentencing Policy. And as I'm sure you're all aware, we will be releasing a new version of the Maryland Automated Guidelines System, which we commonly refer to as MAGS, as well as the Guidelines Calculator tool on Monday, July 1st. Now, many of the updates and enhancements being deployed are in response to feedback that we've compiled from MAGS users. So I'm sure many of you will be happy with these changes that you're about to see. Now, the purpose of this webinar is to highlight those key updates and enhancements that are most relevant to judges, law clerks, and court staff. So I will be demonstrating how to enter sentence information and officially submit the guidelines worksheet through MAGS, while also highlighting new features along the way. Now, in the chat box, in a few minutes, you should see a PDF of today's presentation, as well as a What's New in MAGS 12.0 PDF that illustrates all of the updates and enhancements being rolled out with this new version. Lastly, my colleagues Sarah Bowles and Bella Nosell are here with me today. Sarah will be monitoring the chat box, so if you have any questions throughout the course of this presentation, please feel free to submit them through the chat box. We should also have some time at the end to address any outstanding questions as well. So with that, let me go ahead and pull up MAGS 12.0. Give me 1 second here. All right, so you should be seeing the new MAGS 12.0 login screen. So I want to begin by noting here that MAGS 12.0, this new format includes improvements to the overall appearance. So you can see we have a new color scheme here. We also have updated icons throughout the application. So as soon as I log into the home screen, you'll see those updates as well. I also want to note that MAGS 12.0 will display in a more mobile-friendly format to allow for a better user-friendly experience while accessing the application from devices other than a standard desktop or a laptop. So just starting with entering user ID credentials, everyone should be pretty familiar and know their user ID credentials. If you ever have any questions about logging into MAGS, please feel free to contact our help desk. So let me go ahead and enter these credentials and then log in here. All right, so after logging in, you're brought to the home screen here. And it's from the home screen where users can either create a new worksheet or view, edit, or delete an existing one. Now, I just mentioned that we have some new icons, so I want to point those out. Similar to what you see in current MAGS, we have an edit icon that looks like a pencil, trash can icon, which is your delete icon, and then this download icon is how you're going to view the worksheet. Now, all of you will be searching previously initiated worksheets so that you can proceed with entering sentence information and ultimately submit the worksheet through MAGS. So all of the search features remain the same. You can either filter entirely by jurisdiction, the state identification number for the defendant, first name, last name, case number, or the worksheet ID number, which I'm going to talk about in more detail here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and search for this test case that I created. It's going to be a Thomas McWilliams. And you can see once I search for that particular defendant name, I see the search result come back with 2 unique case numbers. So I can see I have one ending in 1122, one ending in 2523. I can also see that they have the same sentencing date, which was May 23rd, 2024. Now, I'm probably going to reiterate this more than once throughout the course of the presentation, but this is really important for you all to know. So when there are multiple cases that are being sentenced in front of the same judge on the same day, that means they constitute one sentencing event, meaning that one set of sentencing guidelines should be created for that sentencing event. So if you were to search for this defendant, or even one of these case numbers from the home screen, if this multiple criminal event, single sentencing event scenario is initiated correctly, you should see all of those unique case numbers that are sentenced together in front of the same judge on the same day. They should share the same worksheet ID. So if you were just to search by that worksheet ID number from the home screen, again, you should see all of those unique case numbers populate. You shouldn't have to search for each case number separately. Now, let's say the state's attorney, parole, and probation accidentally did initiate these worksheets separately, meaning that even though these are a part of the same sentencing event, they have different worksheet ID numbers. This presents two issues. The first major issue is that when they are initiated separately, the judge is not presented with a proper overall guidelines range prior to sentencing. The second issue comes into play when you all go to submit the worksheets. I'm sure this has happened to many of you because I know many of you have had to reach out with this issue. So when you run into that scenario where you do have a multiple criminal event, single sentencing event scenario, you're able to enter all of that sentence information in MAGS. You're able to submit the first worksheet, no problem. When you go to submit the second worksheet, you get a duplicate error message saying there's already been a worksheet submitted that contains the same SID number, date of birth, and date of sentence as one that's already been submitted. And then you usually reach out to us. We're able to combine it behind the scenes for you and send you back a revised PDF. But I mention all of this, and especially that worksheet ID number, so that you all can kind of get ahead of that issue prior to even entering sentence information. So let's say you search for this defendant, you know that these cases are a part of the same sentencing event, but if you look to this worksheet ID field, you see that they have different worksheet ID numbers. Prior to you even entering sentence information, we really encourage you to reach out to the state's attorney in the case and ask them to combine them for you. Once they do that, you can then proceed with entering sentence information and submitting the worksheets. We ask that you do that just because it's a good reminder for them as well, so that they know moving forward in this type of multiple criminal events, single sentencing event scenario, this is how they should be initiated in the MAGS system. Okay, one new feature that I want to talk about before we start editing a previously initiated case is this new reconsideration, modification, or three-judge review for COB sentences feature. Now, I'm going to go ahead and click on this information icon. Just like you see in current MAGS 11.0, we have several of these information icons scattered throughout the application. If you ever have a question or need some more information about what we're capturing for a particular field, please utilize these icons. All of the information is taken directly from our guidelines manual. They're extremely helpful. So as I'm sure you're all aware, in addition to original sentencings, we also collect worksheets for sentence reconsiderations, modifications, and three-judge panel reviews, provided that they involve a crime of violence as defined in Criminal Law Article 14-101, and there is an adjustment made to the defendant's active sentence, that being period of active incarceration, as a result of that sentence modification, reconsideration, or three-judge review. Now, the guidelines for the sentence reconsideration, modification, or three-judge panel review shall be the same as they were for the original sentencing event. So currently, what's been happening in MAGS is the state's attorneys are initiating a new worksheet for this upcoming reconsideration, modification, or three-judge panel review, and they're basically replicating how the guidelines were calculated for the original sentencing event. However, this new feature streamlines that whole worksheet initiation process, and it allows you to search for and generate a copy of the guidelines worksheet for the original sentencing event in advance of the upcoming reconsideration, modification, or review. Now, before I show you how this feature works, I do want to note it should be the state's attorneys that are generally initiating and copying these worksheets in advance of the upcoming reconsideration, modification, or three-judge review. But I am going to show you how this feature works. As I'm sure you all know, we send monthly MAGS reports to each jurisdiction. So if you see one of the cases on that report, you recognize it as a case for the judge that you clerk for or work for. And maybe you reach out to the state's attorney, ask them to initiate the worksheet for you because you're waiting to enter sentence information for it. If for some reason you're having trouble getting an answer back, maybe they're on vacation, I want to show you how this feature works because it's a quick click of a button, and then you can proceed with entering sentence information and submitting the worksheet. So you won't need to wait on anyone. So let me go ahead and close out of this. Okay. So if I were to copy a worksheet for an upcoming reconsideration, modification, or three-judge review, I'm going to start by clicking this little check mark next to that feature. You can see once I do that, the majority of the search fields are grayed out. They become disabled. you can only search for that original worksheet by case number. And for most jurisdictions, you're going to be searching in an MDEC case number format. The exception to this might be Baltimore City, since they just recently onboarded with MDEC. So for a while, you're probably going to be searching for older cases using that standard 9-digit format that was used previously. So I'm going to go ahead and search for this test case that I created and click search. So you can see once I do that, I get a result for a Jane Smith. With that case number, I can see it was sentenced about a year ago on June 21st, 2023. If I look to the right-hand side, I see a little check mark. I can see that it was submitted. Now, if I move to the left-hand side here, you all are going to see two different icons. Judges and their designees have read-only access to submitted worksheets. So you're always going to see this little download icon, which allows you to view submitted worksheets. You'll also see this copy icon. If you want to copy a case for the upcoming reconsideration, modification, or review, you simply click that icon and confirm that you want to copy it. Once you do that, you're going to be brought to the Offender Information tab. Now you can see almost all of the information that pre-populates on offender information, offender score, list of offenses. It's going to pre-populate based on the information that was submitted on the original worksheet. Now, the only field that's going to be blank and is going to prompt you to make some selection because it's marked with this red asterisk, so we know that that's a mandatory field, is going to be the worksheet prepared by. So you would just go ahead and enter your name. And then, for example, let's say I'm a law clerk, I would just select my title here. Again, these are going to be disabled, grayed out. I can't make any change to them, with the exception of the pre-sentence investigation and representation fields. Those can change based on the new reconsideration or modification or review hearing. So those are editable. You can change those. Now, I do want to note with regard to ethnicity and race. No, those two fields became mandatory fields in MAGS in 2021, meaning that it's possible the original worksheet was submitted without those selections being made. So now that they are mandatory fields, when you copy that worksheet, if those fields are blank, you are going to be prompted to make a response or to make a selection for those fields before moving forward. So you would then click Save this page and then continue on. So I'm just going to quickly show you what like the offender score screen looks like. I'm not going to get into detail here, but you can see this also pre-populates but is disabled. Same with list of offenses. You can see I can't even add a new offense here. I can't make any edits to it. Again, that's just to ensure that the guidelines are staying the same as they were for the original sentencing event. So then you would then proceed with just entering some remaining victim information here, and then all of the sentence information, just as you do for an original sentencing event. I'm going to jump back to the home screen. So that's the new reconsideration, modification, or 3-judge review for COV sentences feature. So at this point, let's treat this test scenario like we're entering sentence information for an original sentencing event. So I'm going to look for a test case I created. I'm going to filter entirely. I'm going to filter by Charles County, and then I'm also going to enter my defendant name and click search. All right, so here I get my results. I can see a John Smith, which involves 2 different case numbers. I'm looking to my worksheet ID, so I can see this multiple criminal event, single sentencing event scenario was initiated correctly since they are sharing this worksheet ID field. One last thing I want to note before I jump to the edit icon. Let's say you're searching for a case. Maybe you get a search result that looks just like this, but you know that one of the offenses, let's say, or the only offense rather, in this 1144 case number, let's say you know that was merged or null pros. If you're familiar with our guidelines rule, you know that merged or null pros offenses need to be removed from the worksheet. I just want to note, you do not want to delete any offense information from the home screen here. Since these 2 case numbers are linked, if you were to go and click the delete icon from the home screen, it's going to delete everything associated with that worksheet ID. So it's from the list of offenses tab that's where you're going to want to delete that merged offense information. I'm going to talk about that once we get there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click on this edit icon. which again brings me to the offender information tab. So I'm going to quickly show you what these first couple of tabs capture. These are tabs that the offender information, offender score, list of offenses, and most of victim information. These are completed by the state or parole and probation prior to sentencing. And then you all are generally responsible for entering the sentence information, GLS overall sentence, alternatives to incarceration, and departure and submit tab. So beginning with offender information, pretty self-explanatory. This is where we're capturing information about the worksheet preparer, as well as basic demographic information about the offender. If you ever have to make a change, sometimes we've noticed, last names, first names, et cetera, are entered incorrectly. And oftentimes it's judges, their law clerks, or judicial assistants who notice that right before they go to submit the worksheet. So if you ever have to make a change, just click on the appropriate tab, make that change, and click Save this page. Now, jumping forward to the offender score. Again, I'm not going to go into the criteria that make up each component of the offender score, but this is where we're capturing basic components of an offender's prior criminal history. It is possible, perhaps, let's say maybe the state and the defense had a disagreement as to how, for example, the prior adult criminal record should have been calculated. Ideally, once that decision is made by the judge, it should be the state's attorney going back and making that correction prior to you taking over and entering sentence information and submitting the worksheet. If that doesn't happen in a timely manner, it is just a quick click of a radio button if you know what that should be changed to. So let's say, maybe the state calculated this to be a moderate record. The defense came out with a minor record level. They brought that disagreement to the judge's attention, and the judge agreed that a minor prior adult criminal record level should be reflected. You would simply just go and click that radio button and then click Save this page. So that's just a quick fix here. All right, so jumping to List of Offenses tab. This is when I mentioned earlier, when you do have that multiple criminal event, single sentencing event scenario, you should see, if initiated correctly, you should see all of the unique case numbers displayed on this tab, as well as the sentence tab, which looks pretty identical to the List of Offenses tab. So again, if you're having to go back to the home screen to search for like a second case number or a third case number, you're not seeing them all displayed here. That's an indication that the worksheet was not initiated properly. So let's say that we do know that an offense ended up being merged or null prossed at sentencing. And again, by guidelines rule, we want to go and remove that from the worksheet. So let's say in criminal event number 2, count 3, this misdemeanor theft or theft scheme of at least 100 but less than 1,500 ended up being merged or null prossed. So to delete the offense from the List of Offenses tab, all you have to do is click this little trash can icon and confirm that you want to delete it. Once you do that, if deleting it happened to affect the overall guidelines range calculation, MAGS would automatically recalculate that guidelines range for you. And then you would simply click Save this page. All right, so moving forward to the Victim Information tab. Now, this is really the first tab that you're going to be entering information for. Now, ideally, the majority of this tab should be completed by the state's attorney or parole and probation agent prior to sentencing. So for example, like whether there was a victim in the offense, if they participated in the sentencing process, etc. Now, it's possible, excuse me, give me 1 second here. Now, with that said, not all of these fields can be completed until after sentencing. So for example, whether the victim was present at sentencing, whether they gave a written or oral victim impact statement, we do ask that you make selections to those fields. So I'm going to go ahead and mark no for the written, but yes for the oral victim impact statement. And I'm going to click Save this page. Okay, so moving on to the sentence tab. So this is where the real work begins. And this, as soon as I click on the edit icon, I'm going to show you one of the biggest updates that we have that I think you're all going to be excited to see. So as I mentioned earlier, we can see the sentence tab. It pretty much mirrors the List of Offenses tab. So we can see all of the adjudicated offenses listed separately. And you're going to begin by entering individual sentence information for each of those offenses. So to begin, you would simply click on this edit icon here. which brings you to the offense sentence screen. All right, so I'm going to talk about a few updates and enhancements that are being rolled out with MAGS 12.0. The first related to murder first degree offenses. Now, when murder first degree is selected as one of the adjudicated offenses, by statute, a life sentence must be imposed when there is a conviction for murder first degree. It can be suspended, but at a minimum, it has to be imposed. So with MAGS 12.0, you'll actually see that this life box, it's going to be automatically checked for you if the underlying offense is a murder first degree. So we can see here, I have murder first degree. It's automatically checked to be life. I can't change that. And that's really just to ensure that the sentence here is being properly imposed. Now, another update is the value that's associated with life. For those of you who are familiar with MAGS 11.0, we do have to assign some sort of value to life for guidelines compliance purposes. And currently in MAGS 11.0, that value is 60 years. However, we were getting more and more phone calls with some sentences that exceeded that 60 years. For example, life suspend all but 70 years, life suspend all but 80 years. And MAGS wasn't capable of allowing that sentence because that 80 years exceeded the 60-year value that was the related to life. So we have upped that value from 60 years to 100 years to allow for that kind of sentence, a life suspend all but 80-year sentence to now be entered into MAGS. So if you ever check that life box, you'll see that the value now displays as 100 years. Now, with this new sentence format, this is that big update that I was talking about, but I think you all are going to be excited to hear this because it takes away a lot of the math that you are currently doing in MAGS 11.0. You can see that we will now require the sentence information to be entered in a total sentence, suspend all but format. And that suspend all but time is going to include any active jail, prison, credit for time served, or home detention. You would then specify any amount of credit for time served, as well as home detention. So we're going to go through a couple of different ways that we're capturing sentence information for these three offenses that I have in my test case here. So beginning with murder first degree, let's say this is a life suspend all but 85-year sentence, and I have credit for 302 days. So MAGS is already automatically checking life for me. And then I'm going to proceed by moving forward and entering 100, suspend all but the 85 years. And then I'm just going to jump to the credit for time served and specify that 302 days are credit for time served with 0 home detention here. You can see once I enter those first 4 fields, MAGS 12.0, it's going to continue to calculate the guidelines applicable sentence just as current MAGS 11.0 is doing. Now, as a reminder, the guidelines applicable sentence is the sum of credit for time served, home detention, and jail prison time. That is what is used to generally determine compliance with the guidelines. Suspended time is normally not considered. The only exception is when corrections options programs are utilized. So again, it's generally the sum of incarceration, credited time, and home detention time that's used to determine compliance. And that's your guidelines applicable sentence. Okay, so once we enter those first 4 fields, you're still going to be prompted to answer whether the sentence for this offense is consecutive to another count in the sentencing event. If you mark yes, you're going to get this little alert message. Again, it's going to say if one count is served consecutively to another, then yes must be selected for both counts in order for the sentences to be summed to obtain the total sentence length in the case. If only one count is marked as yes, then the total sentence will fail to reflect the consecutive nature of the offenses. Now, for this training exercise, I'm going to make all of these concurrent. So if they're concurrent or if there is only one offense in the sentencing event, mark this item no. And then you can jump down and just note whether a probation before judgment was granted for the offense. And I'm going to go ahead and mark no. All right, now finally jumping down to additional options here. This is where you can note if the subsequent offender, if the defendant was convicted as a subsequent drug offender, or if any restitution was ordered. There we go. Sorry, I don't know why I'm having trouble selecting. Okay, well, let's just say yes, and then we'll plug in here. And this is where you can plug in the amount of restitution. Save this page. Okay, so you can see once I enter sentence information for an offense successfully, once I close out, I see this little check mark under the entered column, and that lets me know that the sentence information was saved successfully. Okay, so those are some updates related to a murder first degree. Let me go ahead and enter a different sentencing event scenario for this burglary first degree. Okay, so an additional update that I want to note is that we've added this generally suspended box here. So currently, if a sentence is generally suspended, you all are entering zeros for that sentence information, and then we're asking that you note in the additional information box that the sentence was generally suspended. However, we now have a checkbox specifically to reflect generally suspended sentences. So if I were to check that box, you can see once I do that, all of the sentence fields display as 0 and they become disabled, so I can't make edits to them. And then if I were to save this sentence information, when you go to view the worksheet, you'd actually see generally suspended populate on the worksheet in red text, similar to how you currently see that life flag on the worksheet. Now, I just want to note, I'm going to remove this flag for a second here. Now, I know I've already talked about merged and null prost offenses and how those should be removed from the guidelines worksheet. There is still a lot of confusion about those offenses. And I know a lot of practitioners, especially those who may be newer to MAGS, think that they should be included on the guidelines worksheet and actually proceed with entering all zeros for those offenses, since they're not entirely sure what to reflect for those offenses. So I do want to note an additional alert message that has been added to MAGS 12.0. If you do forget that these merged and null prost offenses should be removed from the guidelines worksheet, and let's say you do end up entering all zeros for these offenses. Let me just go ahead and quickly make selections here. So if I were to enter all zeros and then click save this page, you can see here, I'll now get this alert message. It's going to say, you've entered a total sentence of 0 for this offense. If the offense was merged or null prost at sentencing, please delete the offense from the list of offenses tab. And then just reminding you, merged and null prost offenses should be removed from the guidelines worksheet. And then if the offense was generally suspended, to please mark that generally suspended box in the upper left-hand corner so that that status is reflected correctly on the worksheet. Okay. So those are some additional updates. However, I want to go ahead and show you how to enter sentence information that involves credit for time served with a period of home detention. This is the only type of scenario that is going to require a little bit of math. So let's say for this burglary first degree, I'm entering a 10-year suspend all but 1 year sentence. That 1 year is to be served on home detention, but the defendant, again, has credit for 302 days. So I'm going to start by entering my total sentence of 10 years. And I'm going to go ahead and enter the 1 year, since this is 10 years suspend all but 1 year on home detention. Now, I still want to specify that there's 302 days credit for time served. However, I'm going to need to subtract that credit for time served from the home detention time. Credit for time served plus the home detention, it can't exceed the suspend all but amount. Otherwise, you're going to get an alert from MAGS. So those of you who are familiar with current MAGS 11.0, you'll know that we currently only capture home detention in months. So that required a complicated formula to basically convert the credit that's captured in days into months and subtract it from that home detention value. However, you can see that we now capture home detention in years, months, and days. And I will say the easiest way to figure this out is to convert that amount of home detention into days, and then to just subtract the amount of credit for time served, which is captured in days, from that amount of home detention in days. So again, I have 10 years to spend all but 1 year on home detention. So I know that that's 365 days of home detention. And I'm subtracting the 302 days from that, which leaves me 63 days in home detention here. Okay. And then I'm going to jump down. And again, these sentences are going to be concurrent. So I'm marking no, and there's no probation before judgment. No subsequent offender. Let's say yes for restitution. And then again, we'll say like $2,000 for the burglary. I'm going to click save this page and close out. All right, so there I have my sentence for the burglary first degree. So the last offense we're entering sentence information for is this felony theft. So let me go ahead and bring up this edit icon here. Now this is going to be a 5-year suspend all but credit for time served sentence. So I'm going to enter it as 5 years, suspend all but 302 days, and then I'm specifying that the credit is 302 days. So starting with 5 years is the total sentence. Suspend all but that credit for time served. Again, with 302 days and 0 home detention. Again, these are concurrent. No probation before judgment. No subsequent offender. Yes to restitution. We'll say this is another $2,000. All right, save this page. So before I close out of here, like I said, I did try to show a couple of different sentencing scenarios, how you would input that information. But if you have questions, go ahead and click on this information icon next to the suspend all but field. And you can see at the end here, we state to view examples that illustrate how sentence information should be entered for various sentencing scenarios, please click here. If you click on that, we put together this document that pretty much covers every scenario you can probably think of and shows you what to enter for that particular scenario. So again, if you have a question, reference this document. It should be very helpful, but you can also feel free to contact our help desk. Let's back up. Okay. Whoops. Bear with me 1 second here. All right, so I'm going to save this page and close out. Okay, so here I have all of my sentence information entered for all 3 offenses. So at this point, all of that individual sentence information is entered, and I'm just going to move forward with the GLS overall sentence tab. Okay, so GLS overall sentence, this is all staying the same as what you currently see in MAGS. So on the left-hand side, you can see that MAGS continues to calculate the total overall sentence across all adjudicated offenses. So just looking here, we can see that the total sentence is life, suspend all but 85 years with 302 days credit for time served and 63 days of home detention. I have that total guidelines applicable sentence of 85 years. So if I were just using that overall guidelines applicable sentence and looking to the overall guidelines range, right now I can see that it looks to be a below departure, since that 85 years is falling below the overall guidelines range of life plus 0.5 years to life plus 5 years. So then moving on the right-hand side, this is where you're going to continue to enter additional sentence information, such as the date of sentence, the disposition type. We're going to talk a little bit about that or talk more about that in a moment here. I'm going to go ahead and select other plea agreement for now. And you're also going to be prompted to answer whether the sentencing event is the original sentencing event or a modification to a crime of violence. Now, same thing as with current MAGS. If you have a sentencing event that involves a crime of violence, you're going to be prompted to select whether this is the original sentencing or the modification to a crime of violence. If I were to select modification to a crime of violence, you would see the drop down right below it becomes enabled, and then you would specify what type of modification took place. In this particular case, I'm going to note that this was the original sentencing, and I make my selection there. And then just moving forward with entering probation and jumping down to this 50% of sentence denounced. I'm going to quickly click on this information icon. Now, this is asking to indicate whether or not there was an announcement made regarding the mandatory serving of 50% of a sentence for violent offenses. So pursuant to Criminal Procedure Article 6-217, when a sentence of confinement that is to be served is imposed for a violent crime as defined in Correctional Services 7-101, so those include all the crimes of violence under Criminal Law 14-101, as well as burglary first, second degree. The court, if there is a sentence of confinement that is imposed for one of those violent offenses, the court shall state in open court the minimum time the defendant must serve before becoming eligible for parole. So as I'm sure you're all familiar with, this becomes a mandatory field if you have a sentencing event that involves one of these violent crimes. Those under Criminal Law Article 14-101, as well as burglary first, second degree. However, in current MAGS, this field was mandatory regardless of whether a sentence of confinement was imposed. So even if it was a fully suspended sentence, it was asking you to mark yes or no, which didn't necessarily make total sense because that announcement wouldn't have applied if there was no confinement imposed. So just to note, this field will only become mandatory when you do have a sentencing event involving a crime of violence and there is some period of confinement that was imposed. If there isn't, you won't be prompted to make this selection any longer for these types of offenses. In this case, I obviously do have some active time, so I'm going to go ahead and mark yes. The victim court costs imposed, just as a reminder, this is referring to that $45 fee that should be imposed regardless of whether the case directly involves a victim. It should be imposed for all crime types. So hopefully the answer to this question will always be yes. Whether a no contact was ordered by the judge, and if the judge asked for parole notification. Any additional information that the judge would want reflected, you can go ahead and enter that information in this box as well. And then you click Save this page. Oops. See there, okay. MAGS catches wrong entry. So you can see I entered the wrong sentence date that actually preceded the offense date. So let me go ahead and change that to 2024. And then I'm going to click Save this page. All right, so moving forward to alternatives to incarceration, this still remains the same. This is where we're capturing information about any corrections options programs that were utilized, such as drug court, other problem-solving courts, home detention, Health General 8-507 orders, inpatient substance abuse treatment, inpatient mental health, work release, or weekend or other discontinuous incarceration. So I just want to click on this icon really quick just to note that the commission does deem a sentence as compliant if the judge imposes a sentence of corrections options. So if they utilize one of these corrections options programs and the defendant's initial sentence plus any suspended time falls within or above the overall guidelines range, and it does not involve, in the sentencing of it, doesn't involve a crime of violence, escape, etc. So this is that exception I mentioned earlier where suspended time does come into play. I just want to note that because I'm going to bring it up one more time at the end of this presentation. So let's just go ahead and say no corrections options program were utilized. And then below here, we're just capturing other alternatives to incarceration that may have been imposed. So let's go ahead and select yes. And let's say outpatient substance abuse treatment was ordered, as well as 100 hours of community service. And then if any criminal fine amount was imposed, that would be entered here. And I'm going to click Save this page. All right, so moving to the departure and submit tab. So this is the last tab that's completed prior to submitting the worksheet. So you can see based on all of that sentence information that you enter in MAGS, it's going to automatically flag whether or not there is a departure from the guidelines. So we can see here that MAGS is flagging this as a departure from the guidelines. And that's, as we talked about before, it's because that 85-year guidelines applicable sentence is falling below this overall guidelines range. So when there is a departure, you're going to be prompted to select a departure code. There's space for up to 3. There do not need to be 3 different codes reflected. It's really just based on the circumstances of the case and the reason for the departure. So in this particular case, if I click the drop down, you can see I'm going to be presented with the most common reasons for a below departure. And let's say I'm going to select number 4. And then also an other circumstance, so an other reason here. If you select 9 for a below departure or 18 is the equivalent for the other circumstances for an above departure, you're then going to be prompted to enter a further explanation in this box here. And let's just say age of defendant. Okay, so at this point in time, let me go ahead and save that information. Now, prior to checking this box that you see at the bottom here and clicking submit, I always encourage law clerks, judicial staff to print out a copy of the PDF and review it with the judge prior to submitting the worksheet. That way, if any errors are found, you can still make those changes prior to officially submitting the worksheet. So to view the worksheet, you would click the View Worksheet PDF button here. And you can see once you do that, the PDF populates. Now, we added a couple of additional features to the worksheet PDF. So just to note, we did add the count number. You will now see the count number that corresponds to each offense reflected on the PDF, as well as the worksheet ID number will now display in the lower left-hand corner. If you ever have to go back into MAGS and search for a case, sometimes it's easier to just search for the worksheet ID. Again, if you have a multiple criminal event, single sentencing event scenario. Now, the last thing I want to note when viewing the PDF, this is a common question I get from judges, law clerks, and court staff. When you have that multiple criminal event, single sentencing event scenario, oftentimes those different criminal events occurred on different dates. And by guidelines rule, each separate criminal event should correspond to their own worksheet. So in this particular case, even though I only have one offense corresponding to this 1122 case number, it's still correct that it's on its own worksheet. And then if I were to scroll down, I see all of the offenses associated with the second criminal event that occurred on a different date and has a different unique case number. All of the offenses have their individual guidelines ranges. However, there is still one overall guidelines range calculated between all of the cases since they are a part of the same sentencing event. So if you go to view the worksheet and maybe at first you only see one offense and you're like, wait, I know there were like 5 other offenses. Where are they? If you scroll down, you'll probably see them displayed on different worksheets, which means they're being treated as a separate criminal event. So I did just want to note that. Okay, now before I actually check this box and click submit, I do just want to note I want to talk about disposition types for 1 minute here. So I'm actually going to go ahead and remove these reasons for departure. And I want to show you what happens if I change the disposition type. So we can see here, we already talked about how this is a below departure and how I had selected other plea agreement. I'm going to go ahead and click on this information icon next to disposition type. Now, any sentence adjudicated via an MSCCSB binding plea agreement. So that is a plea agreement presented to the court in agreement by an attorney for the government and the defendant's attorney, or the defendant when proceeding pro se, that a court has approved relating to a particular sentence and disposition. An MSCCSB binding plea agreement means an agreement to a specific amount of active time, if any, not merely a sentence cap or range. The court has the discretion to accept or reject the plea, but the agreement becomes binding on the court under Maryland Rule 4-243, subsection C, if the court accepts the plea. Now, any sentence adjudicated via an MSCCSB binding plea agreement is deemed guidelines compliant. So if I were to go ahead and change this to MSCCSB binding plea agreement and click save, if I were to jump back to the departure and submit tab, even though this looked like it was going to be a below departure, you can see that MAGS is no longer flagging this as a departure because it was adjudicated via an MSCCSB binding plea agreement. And then if you also had a sentencing event that met that criteria for corrections options, a compliant sentence rather, involving corrections options, you'd actually see the words corrections options displayed here, similar to how you're seeing MSCCSB binding plea agreement. And that's telling you it's not a departure because of either the use of an MSCCSB binding plea agreement or the use of a corrections options. So again, I just wanted to point that out because sometimes I get questions where people are expecting there to be a departure and they're not sure why MAGS is not flagging it as a departure. So those could be a couple of reasons. Also, just want to reiterate that it's especially important that you're making sure that you're correctly identifying and noting the proper disposition type, since we can see it automatically factors into guidelines compliance. So if you ever have a question, utilize these information icons, and also feel free to discuss with the judge, perhaps the state's attorney, to make sure that you're correctly reflecting that disposition type. All right, so jumping back to departure and submit real quick, I'm just simply going to check this box. And then if everything's good to go, you're going to click submit. And then you're going to get a little alert saying that this was successfully submitted to the database. You can then either print or save a copy of the PDF. Most often you're probably either uploading it to MDEC and then having the judge electronically sign it through MDEC, or perhaps the judge signs a hard copy and then it's uploaded to MDEC. Okay, so at this point in time, that concludes my MAGS demonstration. I have 2 quick slides just to wrap up with some resources. But before I jump back to the PowerPoint, I just want to ask if there are any questions. Let me also check in with Sarah. Sarah, is there anything that we need to address?
No, we don't have anything outstanding.
Okay, let me just take a look here. Last call, any participants, any questions? Let me see if I see any hands raised. I don't see anything. Okay. All right, let me pull up the last PowerPoint slide here. Give me 1 second. Okay, so you should be seeing a screenshot of our MAGS homepage here. So if you subscribe to our listserv, you're actually going to be getting an email on Monday just identifying and directing you to these instructional and support materials that we will have available to you on Monday. So we will have an updated MAGS user manual, MAGS FAQs, as well as new MAGS 12.0 instructional videos. So if you need a refresher on Monday, please feel free to check out those resources. Or if you have a colleague who maybe wasn't able to attend this training, direct them to these resources as well. Also, just to note, I will be uploading a recording of this webinar to our training page that you see here. So again, if you want a refresher or have a colleague who might want to take a look at this training, please direct them there. Lastly, just want to note, if you ever have any MAGS or guidelines related questions, especially come Monday with this new deployment, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. You can email us at msccsp@umd.edu or give us a phone call at 301-403-4165. Those of you who maybe call with questions on the regular, you'll know that I'm the first point of contact for the commission. Some of us are good friends at this point, so please do not ever hesitate to reach out to us. We're happy to help, especially with these changes that are coming on Monday. So with that, I'll just ask one more time if there's anything else. Let me take a look, make sure there's no hands being raised. Okay. All right. Well, that concludes the webinar. Thank you all for attending. I hope you found this helpful. And just to give you a bit of a heads up prior to this deployment on Monday, again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. And with that, have a great rest of your day and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.